Hello, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Alexis Marks Mosier with Apple and formerly with Congressman Zoe Lofgren's office, and one of the co-presidents of the California State Society. And I'm also joined by Dave Ramey, the other co-president. We're very excited to offer everyone the chance to hear from the California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, this afternoon about a very timely issue, voting and the upcoming election. Since our speaker is in high demand right now, he may need to leave a little early, so we want to get right to it. One quick housekeeping item. Many of you submitted questions in advance, and thank you for that. We've shared them with the secretary, and he will likely address them during his remarks. If you have additional questions, please feel free to type them in using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And after the secretary is finished speaking, we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Before we hear from our speaker, we have a special guest, Congressman Tony Cardenas, a close friend of the secretary's who represents San Fernando Valley. He serves on the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee and is vice chair of the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. He previously served in the California State Assembly and in the LA City Council and is a proud graduate of UCSB, where he received his engineering degree. Congressman, thanks for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the California State Society for continuing to promote the greatest state in the nation, and to remind everybody how awesome we are, and that not only that, but that we're a great part of this country, and the biggest economic driver, the most populated state, but I think the most beautiful state. And so thank you very much, Alexis, for that introduction. And again, it's my honor to introduce Alex Padilla, who's a personal friend of mine. We grew up only 2 blocks away from each other here in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, and we have a lot in common. For example, I'm an engineer, and so is he. He went to a much more prestigious university. He went to MIT to get his engineering degree. But we're very proud of him here in the community that we grew up in, as he's been a public servant and a leader for many, many years, over 2 decades now. And he is currently our Secretary of State. He was elected to Secretary of State twice over. Before that, he was a state senator. He got elected for 2 4-year terms. And also before that, he was elected to the LA City Council and became the youngest council president in the history of Los Angeles. And again, we're very proud of all of the things that he's done, not only with the titles he's been able to achieve, but more importantly, with the work that he's done with his public service. For example, as Secretary of State, California has increased more voters in our state than any other state in the nation under his tenure. He has also done the much important work to make sure that the communication with our local authorities when it comes to elections is constant and clear, and that also that the standards of the state of California are not only implemented and met, but that those standards are of the highest degree. And California is leading the nation when it comes to those efforts. Also, Alex Padilla, amongst his peers across the nation, was elected to be the president of the Democrat Secretaries of State. Again, Alex Padilla is a leader among leaders, and he has done an amazing job of making sure that we protect the integrity of our elections, and also to make sure that that election system in California is an example for the rest of our democracy across the nation. So with that, it's been my pleasure to let you all know what I think of Alex Padilla. He's an amazing person. He's also an amazing father, husband, and friend to many of us. So thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to introduce our Secretary of State for California, Alex Padilla.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Very kind and generous as always. Either good afternoon for those on the East Coast, good morning for those of you in California. Appreciate you inviting me to participate. Alexis, great to see you again. Good to be back with the California State Society. Been before you in person, for those of you who recall, over the last couple of years, in warm weather, in cold weather, on some of my previous trips to Washington, D.C. So when I got the invitation to rejoin you again before this November's election, I thought it was just great, very timely. The term most consequential election of our generation has been used a lot, and I don't think it's any exaggeration. I know you'll have a specific interest in keeping up to date on, but what's it like in California? How does it feel in California? What are you thinking in California? What are you doing in California? So I'll share both the sort of technical aspects of how we have prepared for this election. I won't say that it's coming up in 13 days because in many ways it is already here. More than 4 million Californians have already submitted their ballots. So take that data point to your happy hour this evening. But let me, I guess, start by just giving a quick overview of how we decided to prepare for November, right? Every election we say is important, and it is. Election officials work hard every election to make sure that elections are as accessible as possible to every eligible voter, right? We should be making it easy for eligible citizens to register to vote and to cast their ballot, not harder. Sad to say that in the year 2020, that's still a debate in some parts of the country. But in California, we try to lead and lead by example through a number of opportunities to register to vote, but also in terms of being able to cast your ballot. So I'll frame it in this way. If we can teleport ourselves back to January of this year, we knew that this was going to be a big election year. People were amped up all across the political spectrum. And there were many reasons to be animated, whether it's climate change that's your concern, or healthcare, gun safety, comprehensive immigration reform, on and on and on. No shortage of issues that were motivating people to participate in 2020. You'll also recall that in California, we moved our presidential primary up to March instead of June to try to be more influential in the primary calendar. And by all metrics, we were hugely successful. We had record registration going into the primary, and we had record turnout in the March primary, more ballots cast than in any other primary in California history. So, one could say the state of our democracy was strong. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, right? About 10 days after our primaries, the first declarations of emergency, stay-at-home orders, all those things. And as we've all had the shared experience of how COVID-19 has really impacted every aspect of our daily lives, we knew that elections would be no different, right? We started listening to Dr. Fauci right away. And he said, look, one of two scenarios come the fall. We will either not have flattened the curve, or even if we have flattened the curve with the change in weather, there's a likelihood of another wave or another spike in cases. That's going to be our reality until there's a vaccine that's developed, proven successful, and widely available. So as elections officials, we took that and said, how do we go about administering the November election during this COVID-19 pandemic? And it turns out that a lot of the policies that we have been advancing in recent years to increase access to the ballot make even more sense for this November. Starting with registering to vote. Online voter registration in California since 2012. We've had automatic voter registration in California since April of 2018. And it's not official breaking news, but I'll give you guys a sneak peek. We're getting ready to announce that California now has more than 22 million voters on the rolls. Tony, I know you and I spoke a couple days ago about this, but we surpassed the 22 million threshold on Monday night, which was our deadline to register to vote. So again, a reflection that people are energized, paying attention, amped up to participate this November. In terms of options for casting their ballots, California was the first state to decide, because of the pandemic, to mail a ballot automatically to every active registered voter in the state. Let's just make it as easy as possible because of the success and security of vote by mail. So voters have received their ballots at home. They'll have options for how to return their ballot, either by mail. I still think the U.S. Postal Service is a reliable option, despite them being in the news lately. Voters also have the option to deliver their ballot to any official ballot drop box in their county between now all the way through Election Day, or to deliver it in person to any in-person voting location. But just because we've sent a ballot to every active registered voter does not make this an all vote by mail election, right? California doesn't have just the largest population. We have the largest and most diverse electorate of any state in the nation, which means there's a lot of people that need the in-person option to participate for a variety of reasons: accessibility issues, language assistance, replacement ballots, etc. And so we have worked hard with counties for months now to ensure a sufficient number of in-person voting locations over several days. This concept of in-person early voting is relatively new in California, but it's proven to be very successful. And so in some counties, early voting locations are opening up this Saturday, the 24th. For the most other counties, they start in-person early voting on October 30th. So in most counties, at least 4 or 5 days of in-person voting. And we're on a statewide effort to encourage people not just to vote, but to vote early, right? You've heard the make a plan message from a number of individuals and organizations. That's exactly right. The more people we can encourage to make a plan and to vote early, whether it's by mail or in person, we hope to keep the lines just a little bit shorter on election day, not only to reduce the wait times that we've seen in some other states, but for the safety of the experience. Even voting in person is going to be different. I describe it like going to the grocery store nowadays. Got to look for the signs, keep physical distancing, prepare to see workers outfitted with PPE. We've got to bring your face mask. We'll have hand sanitizer on hand for everybody, whatever it takes to keep the in-person voting experience a safe and healthy one, with the safest option, frankly, being able to vote from home through the vote by mail option. So as I mentioned a few minutes earlier, if early returns are any indicator, and I'll just give you sort of the benchmark. 4 years ago in the 2016 presidential election, we might have been above the 300,000 mark at this point of ballots returned. As of yesterday, we're already more than 4 million. So more than a tenfold increase in ballot returns at this stage of the game, a result of people excited and motivated this election cycle, and us making it easier by automatically sending people the ballots in the mail. So why don't I just kind of leave it at that and open it up to your questions. But thank you all for doing your part to continue to promote and advocate on behalf of California's interests. We try to, like I said, lead by example, not just when it comes to elections. The fact that we have the largest economy of any state in the nation, and policy leadership, I think California represents a glimpse to the future for the rest of the nation.
Secretary Padilla, thank you for that. We'll get right into questions since your time is tight. Where our first one
got about 20 more minutes, just so we're not too rushed.
I encourage folks who are on to use the Q&A box to type in a question. A little commercial there. So Jeremy Empole, who's one of our active California State Society members, works for the California Credit Union League, actually still lives in the state, even though the State Society is sort of the home for all the DC-based expats. He writes, on the ballot boxes, are the counties counting the ballots returned to those boxes daily, weekly, etc.? How is the new Where's My Ballot initiative working?
Great. I'll answer them in reverse order, and feign a little bit of surprise that this was going to be a question related to nonprofit status, but maybe that's a conversation for another day, Jeremy. The ballot tracking tool that he references is not new in California. A couple of counties had a ballot tracking option for voters that we have expanded statewide this year. So we push people, and this is a good resource for all of you if you get questions about voting in California. Vote.ca.gov is sort of the one-stop shop for not just information, but all the voter tools and resources. That's where you can go to register to vote, verify your registration status, sign up for Where's My Ballot. It's the very technical name we gave to our ballot tracking tool. Any voter in the state can sign up to receive automatic notifications on the status of their ballots through the delivery process, kind of like tracking your package when you're shopping online. By email, by text, or phone call, including confirmation when your ballot's been received and when it's been counted. And as of yesterday, we have nearly 3 million voters who have signed up for that ballot tracking tool. And it's a big deal, not just for the peace of mind of those individual voters to know that their ballot is indeed accounted for, but it's created a tremendous dashboard, if you will, for us to be able to see the mail traffic in real time, if you will, and pinpoint any bottlenecks or delays, not just down to a processing facility, but to a USPS branch, even the specific carrier route, if we have enough voters that have signed up in a particular area. So very helpful tool that's proven to be widely successful and popular already after the first few months. So that's the answer to the first question. The other was, remind me about the ballot drop boxes. Oh, how often they're being collected and counted. Right, so at this stage of the game, most counties are retrieving ballots from the official drop boxes within 24 hours. If there's a drop box that is sort of slow on the uptake, maybe they'll do it every 48 hours or so. But they are retrieved by county elections personnel on a very regular basis. I think more importantly to this question, this is different state by state. In California, we've allowed counties to begin to process ballots ahead of election day, not to announce any preliminary results, but because of the increase in volume of ballots overall, but especially vote by mail, we wanted to afford counties more time on the front end to, conduct that signature verification. That's a key element of vote by mail integrity. Open ballots, sort ballots, even begin to run them through the tabulator in advance of the polls closing on election night, because of that additional wave of ballots coming in from the people who will be voting in person on election day. So we're hoping to get closer to final numbers sooner rather than later, in a better sense. But the bottom line for election night, and I know you've heard this elsewhere, we'll have a decent sense in most contests on election night, but because other states have significantly increased their vote by mail for the first time, states like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and others, we may not know if the race is too close to call in a bunch of key battleground states, who the president of the United States is going to be for the next 4 years. If it takes a few extra days to get that clarity, it's not the time to panic. It's just time to be patient and understand it's the process at work.
And that's a good segue to a question from Tim Ransdale, member of our board from Semper Energy. Quote, how are your fellow secretaries of state feeling in states that do not allow vote by mail or early voting? I mean, it's a little bit different question from what you just addressed for the ones who don't have it at all, or it's very limited.
No, and it's a good question because, the conversation about election access, election security, the false allegations about massive voter fraud, all that, it's in the national context. And so, we can answer for California, but I do have enough of a sense in other states, given, my relationships with colleagues across the country on both sides of the aisle for that matter. So the good news is I think most states have responded appropriately and responsibly during the COVID-19 pandemic. It shouldn't have taken a global health pandemic to say, yeah, expanding vote by mail is the right thing to do, both from an election security standpoint, but from a voting rights standpoint, more access is better. So I think in most states, they have expanded vote by mail and or in-person early voting. The states that haven't, it's unconscionable to me why you would still make people, risk their health a little bit more than necessary, or a lot of bit more than necessary during the election. So it's going to mean that potentially results are a little bit delayed if the ballots aren't in hand in advance to be able to be processed. So got to know the rules and make your plan for how to vote. We've seen some of the lines in some of the early voting states, Georgia, Texas, etc. Clearly a demand for people to vote. We're too late in the stage of the game now to say, 13 days out, oh, okay, let's go ahead and expand vote by mail. These were key decisions that needed to be made months ago, as we did in California. Back in March, we were having these conversations. So we get ready for a bumpy election night, and then probably in the days after, with a tremendous amount of litigation anticipated, I think mitigated to the extent that it's only going to play out probably in states that are too close to call. If there's a landslide one way or the other in some states, I think people will forego the legal fees necessary to challenge something that's a little out of reach.
Right. I'm going to combine two questions here. One's from Lynn Jaquez, and then one's from Nathan Miller, about ballot box security. One about the stories about at least one box being firebombed or damaged in some way. How are those secured? What happens to those folks' votes? And another throwing in the additional component of the California GOP setting up quote unquote unofficial ballot boxes. And he also mentions the arson question. So if you could just address the security of the boxes and those two issues. Thank you.
Sure, no, absolutely. And we do still stand by ballot drop boxes, official ones, I should say, as a very viable option. I mean, they were an option for voters for a few election cycles now, especially folks worried about, how many stamps do I need to return my ballot through the Postal Service? but especially in light of recent questions about Postal Service delays, it's become a more attractive option. Official boxes come with a lot of regulations. I know not everybody likes government regulations, generally speaking, but they're important in this particular case in terms of quality of construction of drop boxes. And yes, they have to be fire resistant to certain specs. Even their installation is pretty well regulated to avoid a theft of a whole ballot box. And of course, there's the requirements of how often and who is retrieving ballots from official drop boxes. The incident that you read about recently about fire in one of the drop boxes, was it possible to light a fire in there? Yes, but the suppression built into the design sort of contained it. So it seems like the vast majority of the ballots could have been damaged, but there's enough information eligible to identify the voters who ballots were impacted. So Los Angeles County can contact those voters, reissue a replacement ballot, overnight it if necessary, whatever the voter needs to make sure that they can still cast their ballot and have their vote counted. Now, the issue of the unofficial drop boxes I want to address because there's a lot of mixed messaging going on out there. A little frustrating because we know what's happening in the real world. We know what's happening through attorneys on behalf of the state Republican Party, very different than what we hear and see on their Twitter feeds. So the reality is the unofficial, unauthorized drop boxes have been removed. And the reason they were so problematic is, number one, they were misrepresented. A lot of them have literally, official ballot drop box signage, American flag, made to look very official, which was misleading and misrepresented to voters or the public. Second, because there weren't official drop boxes, as elections administrators, we couldn't attest to their security, to who was retrieving those ballots and whether the ballots collected to those drop boxes were actually submitted to the county. So the Republican Party assures us that all the ballots are accounted for and returned. I would love to believe that, but stuck in my mind is still, the congressional district in North Carolina in 2018, where we saw election fraud to the point where there was a member of Congress who wasn't seated because of concern of the election. So we're actually in court this morning. The Attorney General has brought about two, because we've gone from hearing about these unofficial boxes through social media to issuing cease and desist orders, with including requests for information. Cease and desist order demands were partially met, but partially unmet. So it escalated to subpoena for additional information, which was not responded to. So now we're in court on that. But I think the good news is the deceiving boxes have been removed, and we're just calling more and more attention to the options voters have to return their ballot safely: Postal Service, official drop boxes, or in person. And the value of the Where's My Ballot tool for people who might have dropped their ballot off at one of these unofficial boxes, they can still sign up and get that confirmation message that their ballot was received for their peace of mind.
And in the case of the North Carolina case, it's an interesting segue to this next question. Vote harvesting there was against the rules, so they got in trouble for doing that. In California, vote harvesting is allowed. So can you address what the rules are there? Does it have to be collected by a person? Who can collect them? What are the rules and how often they have to, how quickly they have to turn them into a registrar's office? And is it ever permissible to do vote harvesting remotely? Let's say like through a box or a collection point, or does a physical person always have to be there? If you could review those rules.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think very similar to a question that judges may be asking this morning in California. So ballot collection is allowed in the state of California, but that too comes with rules and requirements. Most importantly, any person who's assisting a voter in returning their ballot must also add their name and signature and relationship to the voter on the return envelope for that vote by mail ballot. So from a voter's perspective, we make it clear, here's your options for returning the ballot. Again, mail, drop box, or in person. If, despite all that, a voter needs assistance in returning, California law empowers the voter to decide who they trust to assist them in returning their ballot. But for the person assisting that voter, again, they have to add their name to establish that chain of custody for accountability purposes. And that's what was lost with these drop boxes, right? The voter submitting their ballot to a box didn't know who was picking it up on the back end. And so if they were wondering later, well, did it ever get there? That's what we try to maintain through our official ballot collection provisions that are allowed in state law.
And under those rules, the chain of custody, is it just one person? I pass it off to one person, they have to hand it in, or could it go through multiple people?
Well, I mean, it could, right? But at least the voter is knowing who they turned it over to. And by law, that ballot does need to arrive at the county within 72 hours.
72 hours. Okay. A moment ago, you said we'll have to be patient because of the different states and the vast magnitude of mail-in balloting going on this year. Constitutionally, that patience is limited to when the Constitution demands the electors meet and cast their votes. And what is the role of your office as it relates to California's electors and certifying them and sending those votes forward to the Congress to be counted?
Yeah, good, fun question. But let me just also reemphasize: if it takes us a few extra days to finish, getting the results, that's still plenty of time for results to be not just audited, but certified in advance of the Electoral College, in advance of the first session of Congress in January. So it's still going to be done on a timely basis. My official role with the Electoral College is not what it may seem. Even though I'm California's chief elections officer, it's for the state and local administered elections. The Electoral College is a whole different animal. So in each state, it's actually the governor's office that takes the lead on the coordination of the Electoral College process within the state. We're in a supportive role. They obviously don't know which electors to see until we advise them on who the winner was in the presidential contest in our respective state. So the deadlines for finalizing the vote count, certifying results is a few days earlier for the presidential contest than for everything else on the ballot in California. So Monday, December 14th, I don't know where you're going to be, but I know what I'll be watching.
Right, exactly. Your office, if you can explain, I mean, obviously this is do you have to increase the number of employees you have seasonally? How many folks regularly work for you? Well, I know you have other duties than just elections. If you could explain a little bit about your office. I know you had done that when you spoke to the Golden State Roundtable a while back, and I think people found that answer interesting. If you could go into that a little.
Sure. So as California Secretary of State, I am the Chief Elections Officer for California, but the portfolio, if you will, is much broader than that. If you look at my budget and number of personnel positions, there's a total of about 550 employees at the Secretary of State's office, the largest division being our business programs division. Right, for anybody starting a business in California, the first step is to register with the Secretary of State. So whether it's incorporation paperwork, LLCs, LLPs, et cetera, even nonprofit organizations, my office is step one. We also have what we call the political reform division. Think campaign finance. All state candidates and campaigns have to report how they're raising their money and how they're spending it to our office, and we make that publicly available on a searchable website. I'm also the custodian of the state's archives. So some neat collections, if you will, of California history going back to even prior to statehood. So there's much more to the office than just elections, but rightfully so. Elections gets most of the attention. In terms of seasonal workers, at times we do hire temporary workers just to help whether it's in the business programs division. When we have a big influx, we try to keep response times and approval turnaround times to a minimum, so we can hire admin folks to help process paper while we're continuing to modernize and automate all of those business filings. But from an election standpoint, we usually start plucking away from other divisions around election time to help us do things like maintain our state voter hotline. We get tons of calls every election cycle with questions about how to register, how to participate, how to sign up for ballot tracking, et cetera. But rarely do we need to hire additional staff. Where that is really seen is at the county level, right? So the relationship between the Secretary of State's office and the counties are ultimately where elections are administered. It's counties that print ballots, counties that distribute ballots, counties that collect ballots, counties that count the ballots with our oversight and partnership. So a lot of counties do end up hiring temporary or seasonal workers around election time.
I guess this will probably be our last question. Looking at the time, California has already embraced a high level of permanent absentee balloting. What are your thoughts on California ever? Do you think it will ever go 100% vote by mail as they have in Washington State?
Well, I hope we're going to do that and better. A lot of people have pointed, the state of Washington and Oregon to me over the years. Like, look, they do all vote by mail, and turnout has gone up, and that's true. We have, I think, a hybrid model more similar to the state of Colorado, where we've been implementing county by county in California. More than half the state's voters already benefit from what we call the Voters' Choice Act, where it works kind of like what I described for this November. It was frankly the motivation or inspiration for how we're administering this November's election. In those Voters' Choice Act counties, number one, every voter automatically receives their ballot in the mail a month before that respective election, and they have the multiple opportunities for how to return the ballot. Again, by mail, drop box, or in person. And then those counties are offering 11 days of in-person voting, both up to and including election day. So it's not an all vote by mail only election. It's sort of the best of all worlds. You want to vote in person, you have that option. You want to vote by mail, you have that option. You want to vote closer to work, closer to home, closer to the grocery store, closer to your kid's school, you have all those options over several days. And similar to the increases in participation rates that we've seen in other states, we are seeing those upticks county by county as we've been making the transition. So it's one of the main reasons why, despite the pandemic, I think we're going to have a huge turnout this November. Registration numbers keep climbing. Like I said, early returns are through the roof, and people are just paying more and more attention, and we're given more and more reasons to understand the stakes of the outcome of this November election.
Well, on that note, and given the time, I'm on my behalf, I'm going to say thank you for appearing before the State Society again. I want to thank Congressman Cardenas for being on and introducing you. And I'm going to turn it back to Alexis if she'd like to close us out with any comments. You're muted right now, Alexis, but I don't know if there's anything you want to. There we go.
No, thank you. This has been really enlightening, and appreciate all the hard work that you're doing to make this a successful election.
Right. Well, thank you, Alexis. And like I said, if any family or friends have any questions, send them to vote.ca.gov. I'm 99% sure they'll find their answers there. We do establish a voter hotline, like I mentioned a minute ago. If you want to jot that down, it's 1-800-345-VOTE, 1-800-345-VOTE. And of course, we accommodate all the languages covered under the Voting Rights Act. And the last thing I'll mention is hope to be back with you all again soon in person when we're allowed. But in the meantime, keep wearing those masks, keep washing those hands. We'll get through this together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Stay safe, everybody.